Greetings, Mark Garang here, publisher of The Sun. And today is George Epstein, one of our regular guests. George, how are you?
Very good. Thanks for having me again.
Good. We're going to try to get, we only have a half hour, so we try to load this up. We're going to talk about politics, maybe a little school superintendent stuff, and maybe even some cannabis.
Oh, all right.
You know, we can toke a little bit at the end if we get.
All right, we can mellow out.
Okay. All right, so on the politics, I mean, not a blockbuster, but Jeb Bradley, who's been our state rep forever, is retiring. And the two up front are the Democrat, now a Democrat, who used to be Republican, is Bill Marsh, who ran against him unsuccessfully last time, and Mark McConkey, who is the state rep, kind of the heir apparent on the Republican side to that position. And I just got to tell the story, and we've talked about this before, and it's funny how us old guys, people have been around, have intersect in their experiences. And when Jeb Bradley ran for the when he was running against Carol Shea Porter, you moderated that famous debate down at Conway L, and that was his undoing in my book. That and an interview I did with him here, because I really got him on the Iraq War at the time. But anyway, when you asked him a question about what his favorite flower was, what did he say?
I can't remember what he said.
He said a lily.
A lily.
Let his wife painted a lily. That's right. That's part of it. Because, you know, a lily is like, okay, let's bring it out for the funeral, right? But but Carol Shea was.
She said lilac with a big grin, because it's, of course, our state flower, and put him in his place on that one. So that was a big win. And it was a huge crowd at Conway L for that debate. It was one of the most interesting ones I've had. I enjoyed that a lot. And she did so much better in that very first debate that I had done with her than she did in future debates. I thought she was right on target, very well prepared for that one. Not so much in some of the future ones. So it was interesting. And Jeb, of course, had a lot of experience as a state rep, but he had never been on a stage quite like that. So it was a little different for him too.
Yeah, and it was good. Anyway, and Jeb, you know, and you know Jeb, and I've known Jeb for years, and really some of my core beliefs are sort of like moderate Republican, you know, some of those. And I've always I've endorsed Jeb at the paper, you know, all the time, and I just say he's the most effective legislator that we have. And good or bad, I think he fits that bill. He's just done it. He's a mover, shaker, very, very savvy that way, moderate, blah, blah, blah. And he's done a lot. He saved Medicaid for the state. He's a conservationist, so he's done a lot for the Dry River thing. I think he set aside. But lately, it seems like he's drifted to the far right.
Well, that's where the party took him. I think, in fairness, the head of the Senate, which he's become, and he has all that power and influence, is so tightly tied to a governor who's of the same party. And so the governor's appointee, Frank Edelblut, in the education side of things, that's taken Jeb down that road of being very supportive of charter schools, private schools, subsidies for parents who send their kids to those schools, and really not very effective in support for public schools, and at the same time has been sort of mediocre when it comes to public higher education. He's not been sort of the driven, gung-ho supporter for the university system or the community college system, although I think he's been better there. But as you said, Medicaid is a particular claim to fame for him. The expansion of Medicaid under Obamacare, which a lot of conservative states didn't do and a lot of conservative politicians didn't support, he got right behind because he saw the benefit of having much wider coverage for lower income people in New Hampshire and the benefit to the provider organizations, the hospitals and docs, helping them to get paid for the services they provide in New Hampshire. So he's been very effective there, and also, as you said, and when it comes to environmental stuff, a strong supporter of those things as well. So a mixed bag, but someone who has been effective, someone who is generally conciliatory, is not a bomb thrower, is not creating a lot of anger and rage, and probably the right kind of guy to be the Senate president these last few years. He's done a nice job.
Yeah, no, I think so too, and I think I just respect him and admire him really. And he's, it's a marker of time when one of our contemporaries hangs it up, So that's the thing.
Yeah.
And and of course he's from Wolfboro, so that gives us. I mean, boy, people around here call I do for something, and boom, he's right on it.
I was going to say the most dramatic aspect of Jeb is his availability, both when he was in the United States Congress and as a senator and as the president of the Senate. You can get through to him, and he listens and he responds, and he doesn't just tell you what you want to hear. He's very careful about that. And if you disagree with him on things, which I do particularly around the public about the local decision making and local authority to make decisions, he has not been particularly supportive in that area. He's not been someone who I view as a town moderator who's been supportive of strengthening town meeting and its authority. And so we have very clear disagreement, but he doesn't fool around about it. He just says, no, I disagree. I think the state should decide that. And we have disagreements on that. That's fine. You cut to the chase, you get it done, and you can always have a conversation with him about any of those things.
And I think he was an advocate of kind of usurping local power over short-term rentals.
That was probably the most dramatic recent one, but there have been a series of those kinds of things where I've had a little back and forth with him. But again, what do you want from your elected representatives? And one of the things you want is accessibility and the opportunity to have a conversation and the sense that he's listening. I believe that he does pay attention, and even if he winds up disagreeing with you, you've had an opportunity to try to win his support, and that's maybe most of what you can ask for.
I guess we can qualify that as a good shout out for Jeb then.
It is.
Yeah,
okay.
Positive. So going forward, then we have on the Democrat side is going to be Bill Marsh, who ran, who was a Republican and ran against Jeb last time and lost, and then Mark McConkey, who's our current rep, and who's I'm sure he thinks he's the heir apparent on the Republican side. What do you think about those two guys?
Well, first you have until September to file for, or when the primary election is, so you could have additional Democratic and Republican candidates. You could have an independent candidate come out of the woodwork for this one. I think that would be someone, there's potential for someone else to appear. But with regard to those two, I don't know Bill Marsh well, an ophthalmologist. We all need ophthalmologists at this point in our lives. I leave here to go to an eye doctor appointment. And this very pleasant guy. I've met him a couple of times and shaken hands and had a few words shared. I have a little bit of a problem with someone who switches parties. A guy his age who had been a Republican apparently all his life and ran and got elected as a Republican. And yeah, I get that Donald Trump is sufficiently off the wall that you want to separate yourself from him. But how do your basic beliefs that are not aligned between Republicans and Democrats just change in the middle of a term in office? I don't get it. I mean, that's a question to ask them. And if I do any debates, maybe I'll have the opportunity to ask that. But I struggle with that, and I don't know what the basis was. But I'd want to know the answer to that. Mark McConkey has on and off been a representative, but for many years in my area, and now includes Madison in his district, which has changed.
Now he's, I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second.
Yeah.
Let me just go back to Bill Marsh, because when we interviewed him here a couple of years ago, I mean, just on the policies, and he was a pro-choice person, and that was a big issue then. But I think what my recollection was is that he just seemed like a nice guy, but maybe not the guy you want as state senator. I don't know where the personality comes in. He didn't seem to be, I don't know what it was, but there was a personality piece that he didn't seem to be as direct. Not that he was trying to be evasive, but he just didn't come off as like, okay, we want this guy as our state senator. And maybe he's sharpened up since then, but we're going to find out.
We will. And you're right. You want someone who can hold his own in a discussion and a debate and be able to win over hearts, and you've got to have some strength of feeling to do that. That's
now, Mark McConkey is he's best known for being on the highway, whatever it's called, the committee.
He chairs the Public Works
Thank
Committee.
you. But he also owns a bunch of land down in Ossipee World. Like and he's been a champion for a lot of improvements on Route 16 up and down. So do you see any potential conflict? Because he owns land, he owns a bunch of land there.
I do, and I'm actually very troubled by it. Years ago, a bunch of years ago, when he was on the Public Works Committee, but I don't believe he was the chair at the time, he talked the Department of Transportation into holding a design charrette so that there'd be designs developed for a rotary at where 25 and 16 meet down by Watson's store. And most of us in Madison are horrified at the thought of basically driving the kind of Route 16 volume of traffic instead of up Route 16 through Madison and through our small town along those roads, and a rotary would potentially really encourage a large increase in that. And
I mean, that's because it'd just be easier to get off?
well, and the actual mileage distances, if somebody's just going by GPS, they might decide that that's the right way to go, is to go through 41 and 113 through Madison rather than go straight up Route 16. Also, depending on the amount of traffic there is on Route 16, people might view it as a traffic avoidance kind of opportunity. And so most of us in Madison would really not want that to occur. And I don't think at this point it will. Now there's potentially a traffic light to appear there, also potentially at Representative McConkey's urging. And I think the troubling aspect of it, you can argue about whether a particular road work is a good idea or not, but the troubling aspect is the amount of potential financial benefit that he might gain from that. As you said, he owns land right around that area, and that some of that land is not very valuable land, and being around the perimeter of a rotary and being very accessible off of that rotary could result in that land being substantially more valuable. Also, it might well result in the elimination of Watson's store. At least some of the designs called for a Watson's store to be removed, and Representative McConkey owns a competing convenience store a few hundred yards away from there. I find that incredibly troubling. That's just not New Hampshire politics historically, where people have been that focused on what is potentially valuable self-interest. And at the very least, you'd say, hey, I'm not going to take any position on that, whereas Representative McConkey's been a very active advocate for those changes that would personally benefit him, and I find that very troubling. So honestly, I'm interested in that race, and there you have experienced people who bring a lot to the table. I'd certainly encourage others who had an interest from both political parties and independents who might want to consider that to perhaps pursue that position as well. It would be nice to have some options.
Now, you haven't done, you've done, when you do the debates, and the Economic Council sponsored a lot of them, they're at the federal level. But have you done
a few?
Would you consider doing a couple here? Like
Sure.
right here, just have like Mark and Bill in, and you could be the host instead of me, because I get sick of hearing me.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I did do a House, I call it more of a forum where you had a whole bunch of House members, and I did do a State Senate one once or twice. So I've done it a few times, but yeah, I'd be happy to do it, and this would probably be a better environment. I don't much enjoy the sort of 6, 8, 10 people lined up kind of situation, because you can't drill down and you can't follow up on the questions that you ask, and you don't get the kind of information.
Okay, good. I'm going to write that down. Thank you, George. Okay, we'll see you.
I work cheap too. Yeah.
And just as a side note about the GPS world going like through Madison, like the people in Eaton, it's the same thing. Their traffic has increased dramatically, and people will come here, who aren't familiar with the area, and they say, "Geez, I put the GPS, and it was a really nice ride going through Long Pond, and I went, holy smokes, is it windy?" And I said, "Well, when you go home, just head down Route 16. It might be a mile and a half longer."
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's put that one to rest. Now, the school superintendent, I'm on the search committee. We've talked about this forever. And actually, in today's paper, Lloyd wrote up what I had said at the full board meeting, saying we need a more thorough interview process, which I was probably channeling you. The truth is, George, and so we're meeting again on Thursday. We'll see how that goes. But Jack Loyne has been spotted. You know, we have a paparazzi around here, and Lloyd took a photo of Jack Loyne at the school board meeting Monday, and he was at the Bartlett meeting. So I'm putting things together here and thinking that maybe since we don't have any candidates, there's a whole story behind that, and frankly, I'm really frustrated with the search committee because we had a good candidate.
But you're back to square one.
We're back to square one, and I would predict that if the candidate that the search committee didn't put forward had gone to the full board or the community, we would have a new candidate. We would have a new superintendent. But that's history. So you and Jack Loyne have you got some history.
We do, and basketball coaching, and he was a math teacher, and we talked the teaching of math, although we didn't overlap as teachers. We played basketball together and against each other. And one of the things we wound up doing was when he was principal, I think it was when he was principal, but at least head of the math department, he was asked by the superintendent, Carl Nelson, to come up with projections for attendance at the schools in Conway, and in particular at the high school in the future. And he called me up and figured we could do some arithmetic together. And we spent a few hours together, not a lot of time, and we came up with a grid and a projection and a spreadsheet showing the projected enrollments at the high school, the middle school, elementary schools. And boy, they were spot on for a number of years. And I'm going to say about 5 years, we did a great job of estimating what those numbers would be. We had projections of in-migration and out-migration. We had estimates from birth rates and stuff like that. So we spent some time on it. We did a nice job. And of course, Jack is a meticulous guy that way. And so,
So why were they off?
Well, they weren't off. They were right on for a number of years. But the further you look out, the further off you get when you make projections, when you make financial projections, when you make projections about population, when you make any sort of economic projections. Whenever you look to the future and you're doing estimates, the number of variables increase over time, and the amount of variation is going to increase over time. We did not come up with an accurate estimate for the drop-off in America's birth rate, let alone New Hampshire or Carroll County's or Northern Carroll County's birth rate. The birth rate in America, and it's in my column this week for those of you tuning in.
One replacement of
1.6. So a woman, on average, women in any country need to produce 2.1 babies to break even, to have a flat birth rate and a flat population. America's down to 1.6. And New Hampshire and Carroll County, I guess I don't know about Carroll County, but New Hampshire's in that ballpark itself. So the drop-off in these past, particularly 10 years, in the birth rates are very dramatic, and the in-migration has not offset that. The housing issues, and there are a lot of factors that influence in-migration, but it's not offsetting the big drop-off in birth rate. And so the numbers are falling, and it doesn't really matter in the sense that for the first 10 years, the high school was roughly the right size for the number of students it had. And you couldn't have built a much smaller high school and been okay for those first 10 years. I taught at Kennett for 6 years in the old high school down in Conway Village, and the entire 6 years that I taught, the school was on double sessions. I never taught a regular school day, and school, first period of the day started at 6:30 a.m. for the high school kids and ended around 12:30, and then the middle school kids came in, and that was the experience that they had for high school. And it wasn't easy, and it wasn't attractive for teachers. And
what years was that?
72 to 78.
The double
sessions.
All right, so that's a long time ago. I mean, that's a long time ago in relation to when we started thinking about a new school. So there were double sessions in the 70s?
Okay, correct. So double sessions in the 70s, 72 to 78. Mr. Appleton, the longtime superintendent in 1974 or 75, put on the ballot, the school board in Conway put on the ballot an opportunity to build a high school for $4.5 million, check it, $4.5 million in 1975 or something like that. It was to be built up where the nursing home is, up on Bowling Alley Hill, not that far from where the new school has been built. And instead, because that was defeated, in part because Mr. Appleton had become a very unpopular superintendent of schools, that was defeated. And so Mr. Appleton retired because he wasn't going to be successful making it work, and he was old enough. And the town brought in Bob Kautz as superintendent. Bob Kautz wanted on his resume that he oversaw a big building project, and he built that horrible addition, and the town approved it.
Wait a minute, which addition is that?
The high school as it is today, with the middle school built off the side of it, the new gym, the facilities for vocational education.
That was all built in the 80s?
That was all built in the 70s, right around that period of time. Wow. By 79, when I stopped teaching, the school was on regular sessions, and that monstrosity was built, and it was impossible to heat, and the air quality was terrible, and the temperatures varied wildly from room to room. No one could find anything in the place. What a wonderful place to play hide and seek. That was its primary claim to fame. And it cost far more than the $4.5 million it would have cost to build a brand new school just 3 years earlier. And it was a political failure on the part, I think, of the school board. We citizens, the voters, did not approve what would have been a smart thing to do, and we would have had a long-term solution to our high school, middle school enrollment in our schools. So that bit of history is an important piece of history, and it's a shame we have this monstrosity of a middle school. We're now jamming some sixth graders into there just because it's a big empty white elephant, and it's going to continue to just suck up money as it stands. But that's the Bob Kautz legacy. He was perhaps the worst superintendent that I saw during my 50 years here.
Really?
Yeah, he was very antagonistic to teachers, drove away teachers who could have been good teachers, and there were odd personal behaviors on his part. He was not the person who.
And after that, who was after Bob Kautz?
I'm going to miss a couple of names that were relatively short term. Before Carl Nelson came in.
No, but who was the, and I know the person that people liked, and I can't think of his name right now, but in the middle there, but in the 90s.
You're not thinking of a Hawkins, are
No. Not, anyway, so if we're not going to come up with it in 30 seconds.
Sorry.
Then, yeah, someone in the viewers is saying, well, you know, it's like Jeopardy.
Absolutely.
They're going to know who it is.
Yeah, they
right?
will.
But interestingly, that whole 70s thing, because I'm in that, we're about the same age, but like I graduated in Berlin, so in my class at high school, I was the biggest class in the early 70s, 73. And then my son, who graduated, I think the first or second year out of Kennett in 2008, as a millennial, he was the biggest class. So we definitely had the population bumps. But when
we
you
did pretty well through 2008. We would have been on target right through there, and the school needed to be built for that maximum size.
Okay, because that was the peak. So you must have done your projections like in 2003 and 4 and 5. Because those were...
Yeah, that sounds about
that,
right.
Okay, I'll give you a little, because I'm thinking, okay, 5-year projection, well, you can look 12 years and see what the kindergartners look like, the class, and project that far. But if you did in 2003, you get 5 years of lead time before you even get to building a school.
But we did the projections for the elementary schools as well, and had to go back to pre-kindergartners and so on. So we did a comprehensive set of projections. Yeah. I'll let Jack defend it. He probably still has the spreadsheets. He's a more meticulous guy than I. But we did what needed to be done. We found what the maximums would be, and you have to build to what those maximum populations were. And I don't think people would have predicted the drop-off in birth rate that we've experienced, and the drop-off in population overall among young people in this area.
There's a really fascinating graph. If you look at the world population over like 300 years, it kind of like bobs around and goes up a little bit. And then over the last 75 years, it spikes. Right. Like we've doubled the world, or tripled the world population in like 75 years. Interestingly, it also shows, based on the decline of birth rate, that in another 50 years when we peak out, 30, 40, 50, 60 years, it's going to go down as quickly. unless something happens.
And that's a big economic question for the Mount Washington Valley, for America, and for the world. And that is that no country with a declining population has figured out how to really grow its economy. It's a real problem for the world to figure out how to, well, it may well be AI, but the world has to figure out how to create vibrant economies without simply pumping up more people.
Well, and I look at it too, is that if the environment, if our planet can survive another 100 years, it may have a shot at recovering.
A reduction in population has real significant benefits. I'm a fan of that, but it's going to create some interesting problems. And one of the problems is for you and me and for the 50 and 60-year-olds, because we simply don't have enough young people to pay for Social Security, to pay for Medicare. You've got to have workers, and you've got to have 5 or 6 workers for every retiree, and instead we're going to be down to 2 workers for every retiree. Picture how much you have to pay in taxes as a worker to pay for 2 old people to be taken care of.
But the good thing, if you look at it from that place, is that people aren't trying to climb the wall to get into China or Russia, but they are here.
You're absolutely right. America's solution conceivably is in migration, because we are so popular. The whole world wants to come here, but we have the political impact, the inability to manage that influx of people, to come up with a consensus basis for figuring out who we're going to let in. But you're right, we have the winning hand if we want to have significant numbers of additional people added to this country's population, or even enough people to stabilize the population.
Just quickly, what do you think? I don't think we've talked about it since you were here before. What do you think about the configuration that the school board came up with of closing John Fuller and keeping Pine Tree, which they did mostly because they think that's where the housing development's going?
I get and I've talked to some educators who have changed my mind a little bit. That is a more flexible option in the sense of if you have all the second graders in one building, then how you divvy them up and how you staff for them and so on, you have more flexibility than you have if you have 25 in one place and 14 in the other place. It does provide flexibility.
Because they're going to do a kindergarten through 2.
Right. And that flexibility by putting them all in one place is meaningful. The transition, you're going with all your friends from one school to the next school, that's beneficial. I still can't picture the parent who has a kid at 3 or 4 different locations and trying to deal with 3 o'clock in the afternoon. What am I going to do? How am I going to manage all these children in all these different locations?
I mean, that's a challenge, but it really is only one more school. I mean, now you have primary, middle, and high school, and now you're going to have minor primary, middle, and high school.
Well, what you're doing is discouraging people from having more children, and we need those kids, right? Because if we have too many kids, too many places. But you're right. I am being won over to that model.
Okay, and then the idea of the Pine Tree School itself, or do you care about whether it's Pine Tree or John Fuller in terms of the physical building?
No, it's clear that there are advantages and disadvantages each way. I would do it primarily on the basis of population distribution. I would put together a map that shows where the little kiddies are and where they're going to be for the next few years and where development is likely to occur, and I would build a school closest to the kids. Yeah. I think the amount of time kids are going to spend on a continuing basis on school buses is a miserable waste of kids' time.
And
so
you probably don't get over to Center Conway very much, but boy, there was a road that was taken over on Old Goshen Road extension or whatever they call it. But I had never been up on that side of it, and it is like going in like a new suburbia. I mean, you go up, there's a bunch of houses, basketball hoops, bicycles, so that's where the kids are.
I think Pine Tree tends to be the likely winner, although who knows what the name of Pine Tree will be. It might be the Mark Garang Memorial School if you can, go out in a bang. We could name it after you.
No, I think Pine Tree kind of works.
Okay.
All right, George, our time is up.
No, really?
It is. So we'll come back. I know where you live.
Okay.
Okay.
Good.
Thanks, George.
Again.
Okay.